Donald Trump's second term has entered us into a crazy version of this world. And a big part of that world is tariffs. If you don't have your head buried in the sand, you know that Trump has been talking about tariffs for many months, if not longer, as he's been on the campaign trail. He's the tariff man. And we got our first big moment with tariffs a couple days ago. It was February 1st, where Trump set a deadline that tariffs were going to go on Mexico and Canada for 25%. And as it was leading up to the time, people were asking him, is there anything Mexico and Canada can do to prevent this? He said, no, not at this point. He said initially that he was doing it to prevent fentanyl from coming across the border. So included in that was a 10% tariff on China, because China supplies a bunch of the precursors to fentanyl to Mexico. But
I want to add, he also said, like, what could Canada do to stop you from putting the tariffs on? He's like, if they became our 51st state, that would be great.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah. So that'll be a fun part of the conversation. But what happens is he signs the executive order on a Saturday that the tariffs are going to go into place on the Tuesday following. And what we get, actually, the day before, on the Monday, is, bam, tariffs come off of Mexico, because Mexico says that they are going to send 10,000 troops to the border to prevent the crossing of illegal immigrants and of fentanyl. They also say something that was buried a little bit that I was interested in, that Mexico's president says they're going to focus on sourcing their imports from different places besides China, which has been a huge growing component of where they get their imports from. Okay. I feel like that might have been a more like an actual goal.
Because to be honest with you, I hear that the Mexican thing comes in. That $10,000 troop at the border thing, that happened under Biden. That's not new.
Yeah.
That happened in 2021. And Biden didn't have to threaten an entire world collapsing economic effect to get that same deal done. So they want to stop sourcing stuff from China?
Yes.
That's fantastic. It's a little less, it's a little less of a hard thing.
Yeah.
It's not like, we're going to bring our imports down from 20 to 10.
Yes.
We're going to work on bringing our imports down from China.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But on this point, I would say this is probably why the tariffs were not canceled. They were just delayed for a month.
Yeah.
So this happened on Mexico, and then later in the day, the same thing happened to Canada, where Canada made some similar, to me, seemingly bullshit concessions. It's like, we're gonna shut down the border. They're like sending pictures of, there's this technology that makes sure nothing can get through.
Listen, Canada already had a new border plan in December, already passed by Parliament, a $1.3 billion border plan. The only thing Trudeau did was say, we're going to continue with that border plan, and we're now going to say the cartels are a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
That is meaningful, but that's not an action. That's not an immediate action.
Yes.
There's no action going on that Canada is doing.
There's geopolitical weight on it. I think it helps Trump if he wants to do the extreme thing of like going into Mexico with American troops.
But does that mean Canada is going to follow them? No, I don't think so.
It just gives them cover in the international stage, which does help a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So now this is what was happening.
Yes.
The
tariffs, the two tariffs get paused for 30 days.
The tariffs on China do go into effect. We are now living in 10% tariff on China world, which is interesting, and obviously it's going to take some time to see the effects of it.
It's also kind of crazy that I don't see it as talked about. Now, there was reason to this. The Canada and Mexico tariffs were going to be more impactful to the American economy right away. I think it was like if the Canada and Mexico tariffs both went through, it would have been a negative 0.4% on our GDP growth, would have lost about 300,000 jobs a year, every year for the next decade, something like that. Meaningful. These 10% China tariffs are meaningful, but they're not as meaningful. It's a 0.1% decrease on our GDP growth. It's 77,000 jobs lost a year every year. That's bad, but it's not as bad as the Canada-Mexico situation. And so I think everyone's breathing a sigh of relief that we just got through the Canada-Mexico thing.
Absolutely.
And letting the China thing go under the radar.
We've also, of course, had a trend where a lot of the imports that we've been getting from China, they have been declining for the past few years, and Mexico has kind of been the substitution where we've been getting a lot of those goods from.
Yeah.
So we're setting ourselves up in a slightly better place. Do not take this take that with a grain of salt. We still imported over $400 billion worth of goods from China last year. That is not a small number.
China's still the number one importer, right?
No,
it's Mexico. Now? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, but with Mexico and Canada, the supply chains are so interlinked.
Yeah.
Like where the story started to focus is, these auto manufacturing plants in Detroit that like send the parts back and forth over the border throughout the process, they're just completely screwed.
Yeah, that's why the big Canada tariffs were so devastating when they were first coming out, because like a car, when it's getting built in Detroit, goes back and forth across the border like 4 times.
Yes.
So it has to cross the border 8 times, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that, yeah, it was an incredible amount of economic devastation that could have been possible there. But the China thing is still important, and it's important not just for the economic effects, but it's also important from the stage that we're now living in the world. We're fundamentally in a different place now, and I think that this is obviously this is going to turn every nation to a more protectionist stance.
Yeah.
And I think it's. Do you think this has an impact on the American consumer over the course of the next couple of months, or do you think the consumer, skates by?
I think it has a slight effect on the consumer. Mm-hmm. It's interesting today. I've been buried in like financial news and stuff. And so one thing that came out earlier today is a survey on inflation expectations.
Yes.
Did you see this?
Yes, I did.
There was a major bump. One thing I also saw, I want you dig in more, is how partisan the bump was. Republicans expect inflation to go to 0. Democrats expect it to spike. But the survey, it was enough, it was weighted in a way that overall inflation expectations spiked like 1% in the survey.
Yeah.
So I do, inflation expectations are a concrete component of inflation, because when you create inflation expectations, those people that expect inflation feel incentivized to go spend their money, and which they can create it.
Yes, that's actually it's almost like a bank run in the instance. Like it's a psychological effect as much as it's an economic one.
Yeah.
If you spend the money, now you're lowering the supply of that product.
Yeah.
Now the prices are going up. It's almost like what we're seeing with eggs right now. We are having an egg crisis, but the rush to hoard eggs at current prices then raises the price.
Totally.
So that's how can you tie that back to what's going on with China?
It's
showing that it's causing inflation expectations to rise.
I think so. And I think the general whole stage that I said at the beginning of this video of like we're in tariff time.
Yeah.
I think that is a contributing factor. And the China tariffs, I think, will come through at least in a fair number of goods that people will notice. Mm-hmm. I am curious. I don't want to interrupt you if you have something, but I'm curious about like, I think one of the potentially most, if we steel man it, the most beneficial things that a Trump administration might want is the idea of reshoring manufacturing, of like national defense, national security needs, making sure we can make our own stuff and we don't rely on China, our number one foreign adversary, to get our stuff. I do think that you need a pretty staunch protectionist environment to make that happen. Staunch enough where manufacturing is coming back to the U.S. kind of like in a wave. That's something that I could see happening with 25% tariffs on Canada and 25% tariffs on Mexico. And it would hurt a lot. It would suck, but I do think that like companies would start to consider, okay, no, we need to start sourcing things back in America.
Yes.
A 10% tariff on China does not do that. It's not powerful enough.
No, it does nothing. One, it's not powerful enough. 2, it's not targeted to goods that we even want to produce here, right? If it's a 10% tariff on everything, that means it's a 10% tariff on stuffed animals, on toys, on low-level electronics. That's not stuff that we want to build in the United States. That's not desirable. No company will ever be able to make a profit building those things in the United States because of all the labor rights we have. It would not be possible. You need more high service or higher manufacturing, like semiconductor stuff, in order to bring manufacturing back to the United States. It's not going to be the stuffed animals anymore. We're past that. And so this 10% tariff on China does nothing for that. Also, what you said, 10% isn't even enough. A 10% tariff does not make the price that much higher than a domestic price.
Exactly.
So there's no incentive for the company to uproot its entire supply chain to the United States.
I will say where, again, I want to steel man here is, does this general environment of uncertainty around tariffs, does that start to incentivize companies? Thinking that
that's totally possible.
Rather than wanting to having to worry every month as far as whether these absolutely devastating levels of tariffs will go on. And we haven't even just mentioned what came out today, that Trump announced that he's going to be putting reciprocal tariffs on a handful of countries. Again, completely vague, but something that companies kind of need to shit their pants about.
Wait, explain what a reciprocal tariff is.
A reciprocal tariff means if countries put tariffs on us, we are going to put the same tariffs back on them.
On the exact same product.
Yes.
Okay, so like an American car going to Europe, say it hits a 50% tariff going to Europe. A European car coming to America, we give them a 2.5% tariff.
Yes.
We're going to make it 50% to match what the Europeans do to us. That is Trump's idea.
Yes, it's the idea. It's the rhetoric. Again, we should not put too much stock into it actually happening because of what just happened with the tariffs on Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, and there's also like it sounds reasonable, and I don't blame people for believing that's reasonable. It sounds reasonable, but the trade networks that have been created between these two blocks, the European bloc, the American bloc, are delicate, and they're all done this way for a reason. These numbers and these tariffs didn't come out of nowhere. There are specific reasons why these tariffs are in the place in the way that they are. Now, it's fine to go around the edges here, but doing a 50% tariff on your allies for your allies' product is devastating to your allies, which is then devastating to you.
Yes.
So which was
part of the problem with Canada and Mexico as well, and why that.
It's like I don't understand why Trump wants to destroy the German economy. That doesn't make any sense to me.
No.
Right?
No, but I do see why Trump wants Trump, or like I would want, a wide range of manufacturing capabilities. That is part of the problem with, you say, like, yes, stuffed animals we don't want to make here, but there are also like relatively lower end chips that would still be really important in a lot of the military technology that we would make, for example.
I get that.
We want, like, if war with China started, we wouldn't want to be buying all those from China.
Yeah, and I get that, but I think it's a little more ideological than Trump, because then he would have gone the Biden route and done the targeted tariffs, right?
Except that the Biden route is arguable in how effective it's actually been.
But what makes a 10% across the board tariff?
I don't think that's effective either. So I think,
understand.
Yes, I think, again, we're talking more about like what could this be. I think the 10% tariff, I think he's going for something just like what happened with Canada and Mexico. Yeah. And China he just happened to not be able to get Xi Jinping on a call soon enough, or whatever concession Trump wanted. She was like, nah, it's okay. He thinks that they can handle the 10% tariff from the U.S. Maybe that's true. We'll see how it plays out.
We'll see. And I think that's the lesson of the Trump administration is we will see. We will see.
Yes.
Don't take anything at his word. Don't believe him when he opens his mouth. He's always lying. He's always bluffing. Yeah. He's a poker player. Do not ever think you know what he's going to do until he literally does it.
But the important part about that is, like, this is so completely opposite to Joe Biden.
Yes.
Joe Biden was trying to create a solid foundation for everyone in the international community to stand on and to know where they were, at least, right? And Donald Trump is trying to take all of that away. And you can argue there are benefits that the U.S. can get from that, especially on a case-by-case basis. For example, today a story came out, or Trump has zeroed in on wanting Ukraine's rare earth metals.
Yeah.
And so he's thinking about, or mentioning, a deal that could be made where the U.S. gets some of Ukraine's rare earths and provides security guarantees. Like, yeah, having access to rare earths on its face would be a good thing for the U.S. The issue is we are throwing away goodwill. Yeah. So any goodwill that could buy us help from the international community is gone. And I'm not enough of an expert to know how much that goodwill has bought us over time, but it does feel scary to think that we are in complete deal-making Wild West territory now.
I mean, we are back in 19th century American geopolitics.
Yeah.
Which is a really interesting place to be. I didn't expect it.